Kia ora. Welcome to episode 63 of the SWNZ Podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
Another great week for news from a galaxy far, far away, so let's jump in and talk Star Wars, starting with our weekly news roundup. First on our list is the fact that we now have confirmation of the release date for the Obi-Wan Kenobi streaming series on Disney+. It will be coming out on May the 25th. May the 25th, of course, is the anniversary of the initial release of Star Wars in 1977 in the US, not in New Zealand. We got it some months later, so this will be 45 years since Obi-Wan Kenobi first made his appearance on the big screen, that we will be seeing him on the slightly smaller screen in our own homes. So that's been officially confirmed, and along with that date information, there was poster art for the Obi-Wan Kenobi series that was revealed. Great to have this date locked in now. That's about 12 weeks away from where we are currently.
I'm really excited by this. Obviously, everyone knew this was coming. It wasn't like out of the blue or anything like that. Some people were surprised it was not May the 4th, but I kind of like the anniversary date better.
It's a little more official in some ways rather than fan-generated, I think.
May the 4th tends to be largely dominated by merchandising. A lot of companies want to release out collabs, product lines, do sales and things like that. And I think all of that hubbub might have drowned it out. Of course, Kenobi kind of deserves to have a spotlight, a dedicated day where fans can just really focus and celebrate on this very, very long-awaited show. There tends to be less of an official fanfare on anniversaries of movie releases. There tends to be, a post or two on social media going, 20 years ago today, blah, blah, blah. But there generally isn't like a big merchandise haul or anything like that. They tend to save those things for either Black Friday or May the 4th, or as we see with The Mandalorian, the sort of bring home the bounty kind of weekly release, which tends to be towards the end of the year, following on from the older Force Fridays that happened where the merchandise was released leading up into the sequel movie releases. So I think this is a really good time slot for it to come out. Of course, we don't know if we're expecting anything between now and then. I kind of thought we might be hearing something about Bad Batch by now, but I guess we've got to wait and see.
It's supposed to be in the Northern Hemisphere spring, i.e. our autumn, which is coming up very shortly, but we haven't heard anything solid along those lines. Oh, one little bit of trivia that stemmed from the poster art. We see Obi-Wan Kenobi in a bit of a desert scenario, presumably Tatooine, so as to not to give too much away, but the lightsaber he is holding is visibly not one of his own. It appears to be the Darth Vader Anakin Skywalker lightsaber, at least in the small number of pixels that we can actually see. So I think that's an intentional tease that just gives us a little bit more information, because we know that Hayden Christensen is going to be showing up possibly both as helmeted Darth Vader and in some form or another non-helmeted Darth Vader. I really hope that that's the way we see them make use of him in this series, to be honest.
Well, I'm also curious to see if we might actually get some sort of flashback moments to previously unseen sort of Clone Wars era Ewan and Hayden reprising as Obi-Wan and Anakin proper from the sort of prequel era, considering what they are able to do with computer-generated technology, especially after the sort of fantastic work that they did on creating Luke Skywalker for the Book of Boba Fett. Simply de-aging an actor, 10 years or 20 years or something like that is not a big stretch. So I kind of think that would be fun if we get some moments where perhaps Obi-Wan is thinking back to moments where Anakin was a very different person.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. This is only going to be 6 episodes in total, and it's a limited event series, so we're not going to get subsequent seasons. So the story's going to have to be fairly tight. And they're going to have to, if they use flashbacks or sort of time movement around in any shape or form, then going to have to keep the story pretty tight for it to make sense.
I think it would be a missed opportunity. As you say, this is a limited series. I think they know that the fans would love to see a little bit of that.
Yeah, for sure.
And getting both of those actors back in the same place, in the same series, and not giving us a little bit of Obi-Wan and Anakin goodness, I think fans would be like, oh, I wish we kind of gotten just a little bit of a flashback or something like that.
Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of casting news that I just want to throw into the mix here. So if you want to stay completely free of potential spoilers, you might want to jump forward a couple of minutes. But I'm not going to give too much away here. And the reason I'm going to mention it is because there's been a little bit of fear that the entire series might be set on Tatooine. But I think we're going to get something quite a bit more complex than that overall. We know that Rupert Friend is one of the people who has been cast to be playing a character in this series. Bespin Bulletin is reporting that he might be playing a Grand Inquisitor. So I think that's not giving too much away. I think that's just giving us a little bit of a notion that there's going to be some complexity that he's going to be involved with that is a little more than just interacting with the residents of Tatooine.
Yeah, this doesn't sort of feel too far-fetched. Obviously, always take these sort of things with a grain of salt. But we know that the concept of the Inquisitors, they sort of work for the Emperor and Darth Vader, tracking down those last remnants of Jedi scattered around the galaxy after Order 66. We see their presence in Rebels, where they are obviously trying to track down the likes of Kanan Jarrus. So I guess someone, whether it's Darth Vader or anyone else, is maybe suspicious Obi-Wan is still alive. Maybe they're tracking down rumors of a Force user, things like that. So it's not a far stretch to think that there might be a run-in with an Inquisitor of some kind, or more than one, because Obi-Wan, certainly his skills would, necessitate taking more than one sort of assassin to try and take him out. Certainly this would be within the sort of Rebels era timeline, whether this is soon after episode 3. I'm inclined to think it's more towards that end of the 20-year gap between episode 3 and episode 4, because we're obviously going to be dealing with Ewan McGregor. If it's set just before A New Hope, I think it would be a little bit hard to kind of really morph him into the Alec Guinness appearance.
I think we're more likely, and we don't know to what extent they may or may not be involved. I think it's going to be more likely when Luke and Leia are still very young.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, where he's got a little bit more of perhaps an opportunity to get caught up in a few other things. Obviously, when Luke is a little bit older, he's going to have to sort of hover around a little bit and make sure that, things don't go awry there.
So we're not going to dig too deep into the speculation here because we don't want to. We want to just enjoy it as it comes. But I think it is just a little bit interesting to mention that we're very likely to be seeing, because of that information and the other bits of information we've got a feel for, we're going to be seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi in a few different settings.
It's always really hard when these series are sort of such a long time coming. You get so excited about them, and at the same time, you can't help but start to wonder, what are we going to see? Where are we going to go? What the timeline's going to be and things like that. And you kind of start to have a few ideas in your head that perhaps you'd like to see, perhaps things that you're not so fussed on seeing, but just the wait, your brain just sort of starts to entertain all sorts of ideas. So I'm just super excited to get stuck in and finally get to watching this in May so that we can finally put all the sort of fan theories and speculation to rest.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to other news roundup items, talking about the Ahsoka series. Now, the Ahsoka series we're not going to be seeing this year, but it's going to be in production for most of this year. We'll be seeing that in next year's set of title releases. But some casting news for this one. Ray Stevenson has joined the cast of Ahsoka. The Hollywood Reporter is reporting that he will be playing a villain, not Thrawn, just as a note. So we don't have a lot of other information for that. Now, Ray Stevenson is interesting because he voiced Gar Saxon in Star Wars Rebels and the Clone Wars. No one's suggested that he's actually going to be playing Gar Saxon in Ahsoka, but I guess it's not completely off the cards. So yeah, he'll be playing a villain, and that's just another bit of information that lets us know that the ball is still rolling and people are getting involved, and will be filming their characters, their roles in that over the next little while.
Yeah, I'm very, very looking forward to the Ahsoka series. Obviously, this one is further down the pipeline than a lot of the other series, but any little bit of information, just letting fans know that, yep, things are ticking along, things are progressing. I'm really looking forward to getting a little bit more information about this one.
Yeah, well, Ray Stevenson's a little bit interesting in terms of casting, because he voiced characters in Star Wars, but he has quite an extensive recent role in shows like the History Channel's Vikings. So, he is an established face character as well as doing that voice work for Star Wars. So, yeah, that's going to be an interesting mix, and it'll be interesting to see what character he ends up playing. Okay, moving on to Star Wars gaming news. Star Wars The Old Republic, the MMORPG, is going to have its Chapter 7.0 release this week, coming out on about Wednesday New Zealand time, or exactly Wednesday New Zealand time. 7.0 is called Legacy of the Sith, and there's a few interesting bits and pieces that we want to just talk about that might be actually quite relevant to those of you who have not actually tried this game before. First up, 7.0, as well as heralding new story content, also heralds a new Galactic Seasons season. For each of these Galactic Seasons, we get a new companion. The companion that is going to be available to players in second Galactic Seasons is a Droids character that we think is strongly inspired by Cad Bane. So if you're a Cad Bane fan and you want to play with a Cad Bane-like partner in Star Wars The Old Republic, then you'll be able to do so very shortly. Those companions, when they become available to Galactic Seasons, often have a few different outfits that you can customize. So with a bit of luck, we'll have something that actually looks like Cad Bane as well, with a wide brim hat and so forth. Wide brim hats do show up because there are a few costumes that have a bit of a Western feel in Star Wars The Old Republic. Now, Legacy of the Sith that's coming out in, like I say, this coming Wednesday, it is relevant to new players as well as old players because there's a bit of a shift in the UI and the sort of rotations that you'll be using for the different character classes. So if you've ever contemplated recently looking at the Old Republic as a first-time player, now is a really good time to do so because you'll be learning the new fighting mechanics at the same time that existing players are. And on that note, if you're contemplating giving it a try, like I say, it's a very good time to check it out for new players. A new subscription bundle that they're calling a Digital Collector's Edition will be available at the time 7.0 launches. Now, it is possible to play Star Wars The Old Republic completely free. You can sign up and play as a free-to-play character, but with this subscription bundle, you will get 30 days of subscription time and all the benefits that come with subscription, which includes access to all the expansions, including this Legacy of Sith. But for $39.99 US, you will also get 2,400 cartel coins, which is an in-game currency that you can use to buy basically cosmetic items. And you'll get a number of additional items in the game, including Darth Malgus's command chamber mount, Darth Vindican's dual saber, and an MDCH-1 droid mini pet. Those are all going to be exclusive to the Digital Collector's Edition at this time. I think that's a pretty fair bundle, a good way to make use of being a new subscriber, or even if you're an existing subscriber, bumping out your subscription with 30 days of subscription time and getting a pretty cool bundle of in-game items and currency to use.
Yeah, really looking forward to this new expansion, and this bundle is a good deal for, like you say, new players or subscribers. Definitely keen to check out the new changes to sort of the combats. We're getting a new level cap, new abilities, and
new
things
story,
like that.
New story chapter.
Lots of new story with some really, really cool characters. It's definitely really ramping up. They've got a lot of cool things planned for this sort of 10th anniversary celebration that are basically going to be running all year long.
That's the thing I didn't specifically mention. The 10th anniversary of Star Wars The Old Republic, we have mentioned in the distant past, took place in December of last year. This game update was originally scheduled to come out at that time, but it had to be bumped by a couple of months. So yeah, this game update 7.0 basically does represent and coincide with the 10th anniversary of Star Wars The Old Republic. It's still going strong, and all signs indicate that it's going to be going strong for quite some time yet.
In other Star Wars game news, if you're a fan of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, the mobile app game, the latest character to be added is a new Inquisitor character from the other video game, Jedi Fallen Order. At the moment, if you hop onto your game, you'll be able to unlock the 9th sister. This is the second character being added to the Inquisitorius tag, with the first character that was added is also an Inquisitor from Jedi Fallen Order, alongside the second sister. So I'm really keen to see if we get some of the characters from Rebels alongside. People are hypothesizing that we will get a full 5 Inquisitor characters to flesh that out. We know that we don't have a brother in the game yet. So,
Don't have a Grand Inquisitor?
No, I'm very, very hopeful that they will add a Grand Inquisitor to the game. But it is really, I'm always excited to see when they add not just sort of mainline characters like Boba Fett and Fennec Shand from the Book of Boba Fett, but also popular characters from other video games.
This is interesting because if they're adding Inquisitors from existing material, it's not, and as you're implying there, they may add more to make an Inquisitor team. It's not inconceivable that it may tie into the notion that Inquisitors may be involved or exist at the time of Obi-Wan Kenobi series.
Yeah. So if you're new to the game or a long-time player, do check it out. The characters are free to collect within the game. It is possible to really enjoy the game and play to a completely free extent. You don't need to spend any money to really enjoy this game, collecting up Star Wars characters and stuff. So definitely check that one out if you're a fan of Inquisitors or a fan of Galaxy of Heroes.
Or Jedi Fallen Order for that matter.
Yes.
Alrighty, let's talk about the Armageddon Expos in New Zealand that will be taking place for the rest of 2022. Last time we talked about Armageddon Expos, it was to unfortunately confirm that what was going to be the first expo of the year, Tauranga, was going to be postponed. We now have solid dates for all of the events for the rest of the year. Wellington and Christchurch, which were due to take place in late March and early April, have also been postponed to later in the year, not out of absolute necessity at this point, but because of uncertainty, and with this movement they now have a lot more certainty that they'll be taking place on the scheduled dates. So everything's going to be taking place from June onwards. The first event for the year is now going to be the Auckland Winter Armageddon Expo, taking place on June the 10th to the 12th. Because of the cancellations and movement of events, this is now going to be the 100th Armageddon Expo. Quite cool that it's going to be a biggish one in Auckland. Tauranga will be taking place in July the 23rd and 24th. That's the new date that it's been moved to, so it's been slotted in between Auckland and Palmerston North. Palmerston North will be the third event, August the 6th to the 7th. Then we have the normal dates for Auckland Spring Armageddon Expo taking place over Labour Weekend, October 21 to 24. And then the postponed Wellington and Christchurch events will take place. Wellington on December the 3rd and 4th and Christchurch on December 10th and the 11th. So back-to-back weekends there. So everything has been packed into a slightly tighter, just over 6-month period. But at least we're going to get 6 Armageddon Expo events for 2022, which is sort of unprecedented and very cool.
Yeah, I know the organisers said that they were very keen not to cancel any events, that they would be simply postponed. I think fans around the country understand why these events have been bumped. Hopefully the fans that wanted to attend these events on the original dates will still be able to make it to these rescheduled ones. I think it is fun, as you say, that the 100th event will be Auckland. Auckland events always are big. They're ones that draw people from around the country. Probably at June, I doubt we will have any international guests, but I'm sure the organisers will try and make it feel as exciting and sort of celebratory with virtual panels and perhaps some local talent. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to be really interesting having some Armageddon events in sort of summer weather. I know there's always a consideration for cosplayers and costumers, whether certain locales, certain times of year are very hot, very cold. It's going to be very interesting having 2 events in December. Primarily, this might be quite good for uni students and things like that. The December dates are generally after end of year exams, so they're a little bit more free to move around. These are probably going to hit a little bit closer for primary school students, but they're still on weekends. So it'll be really interesting to see what the fans think about these different dates. Obviously, ideally, they would be spread throughout the year, but I'm really hoping that all of these events are going to be fun for local fans.
Now, we talked about all the upcoming live-action production news earlier in the podcast, but there is one bit of live-action material I just want to slot in here. It's a little bit of a lower tier bit of information, so we didn't include it in the initial cluster. But via Production Weekly, we have information that there is another live-action series that's going to be filming later this year that's not one of the named ones we already know about. There's speculation that this might be a High Republic title, but we don't have anything solid at this point. So we bring that up at this point just as a sort of a watch this space notification. We're definitely keen to be talking about this as more information comes to hand, but very interesting to know that there are other material potentially being developed based on the reception of stuff that's been released to date in various formats, and High Republic may see its way out of the books into something a little bit more visual.
I still wish that they had launched the High Republic concept as a full multimedia range, a video game, a live action series and or animated series, books, comics, and just kind of done it all at once. Even action figures and things like that. I think a lot more fans would have bought into it. By the time if this is real and it is a High Republic series, by the time we're actually seeing this, there's going to be quite a backlog of books and comics for fans to wade through. And a lot of people are just going to go, too much homework. And I think the books and comics would have probably gotten more fans, more sort of readers on board and more sales for these items if they had launched it. Because with the way that they were hyping up the High Republic when they sort of announced it, I thought it was going to be like Shadows of the Old Republic. And I know we've talked about this before, but it's so much easier to get people on board if they know that it's going to be part of a visual medium as part of it. Because Star Wars is visual. It started with movies. We've always had, animation going all the way back to the 80s and stuff like that. So I really do hope that it will be a High Republic era. I want a live action series. I think that it'd be really fun. There's a really strong visual branding to the Jedi. They've got a sort of a well fleshed out concept of the world. Be well
received. It's an era where storytelling is fairly, it's ripe for a whole array of material and a whole array of stories to be told. I mean, the novels are clearly very popular with a subset of the fandom, without a doubt, and I think this idea may have been born out of that success. The fact that a number of the novels have made it into the various top 10 lists or best-selling lists when they've been released, I think may have spurred on the development of this, because it's not one we'd heard of before in the previous title announcements, so there's an interesting development if this is the way it pans out. Like I say, we'll watch this space and we'll be talking about this down the line without a doubt.
Considering that big blitz of all the different shows and things like that they announced with nothing more than basically logos, I do wish they'd at least give us kind of more concrete information rather than these kind of whispers through the grapevine of, it's being filmed under,
if it is truly filming, then it would be nice to have some certainty around it, because all of the other ones that we'd heard about that we have no notion about timelines for, they just feel quite vague at this point and even uncertain. But clearly there's things under development and just communication would be great at this point. And just to round out our news roundup, if you're a fan of Star Wars music, and there's a lot to be a fan of personally I think, you might be interested to know that a new expanded score from Rogue One: A Star Wars Story has just been released digitally by Walt Disney Records. It's available via Amazon and iTunes, and we'll put a link to that down below. It's got over 40 different tracks on it now, so it is quite expanded from the original release. We're fans of Star Wars music ourselves and have a reasonable collection. It's cool that they're creating these extended releases, and it'll be fun to see them do it for some of the other more recent titles as well.
Yeah, it's always a little bit frustrating when you know that there's like not quite 2 hours worth of music, but a lot more than what's generally released on the soundtracks. You know that there's big chunks that are missing. Either they don't want to release it at the time of the movie because perhaps a title track or particular moments in the score might, give things away, but at least sometime later, when the movie's out on streaming or DVD or whatever, let fans listen to all of it. We want to support the people that help make Star Wars, and the music has always been such an integral and important part of Star Wars. I really do like listening to the music and as much of it as I can.
All right. Sort of a topic that's sort of bridging the Star Wars news roundup and our Star Wars product conversations is the fact that the HasLab Razor Crest has started shipping in the US. A few people have got their hands on this or are expecting to have it delivered very, very shortly. Consequently, there are a few unboxing videos starting to show up on YouTube, and this is a very cool way to really eyeball what the final product looks like with all its detail and packaging and so forth. Like I say, there's a couple of unboxings out there, but on Adam Savage's Tested YouTube channel, we checked out the half-hour unboxing, which really showed this product in all its glory, and we'll put a link to that down below. If you're waiting on a Razor Crest, it may be a shade longer before we get them in New Zealand. You might like to just take a look at that video.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see it all fully sort of built in sort of real people's hands, seeing the weathering, the paint finish on it, all the detailed components, and seeing just the sort of the real scope of it in a real space. It's very impressive, and I'm hoping it won't be too much of a wait for New Zealand fans to get their hands on this.
Okay, let's talk some product announcements. These are things that we've heard about that will be coming out soon, but we don't necessarily have purchasable links for in New Zealand just yet. A High Republic tie-in book called The High Republic and Illustrated Archive will be coming out later this year. It's a 160-page hardcover, which takes a look at a lot of the concept art and related material. It's a bit of a visual dictionary type publication that will be coming out. There is an Amazon pre-order link for that, but we'll hopefully see their pre-orders for that locally as well. So if you've been a High Republic fan, it's good to get some sort of tie-in material for that.
I think this actually really does sort of point to the likelihood that there is going to be a live action series, putting out a little bit of a visual compendium, kind of like a, in case you missed it type, catch up on your homework type, putting it in a visual and easily digestible format.
It'll be a good structured sort of starting point if you haven't read all of the material, good introduction to characters and concepts, and can help sort of guide you to what to read depending on what sort of approach you want to take to consuming that information. A bit of video game news. Aspyr has been porting over a few older video games to different formats. Coming soon, there will be a Force Unleashed port for the Nintendo Switch, coming out in April actually. There's details on Nintendo.com about that. That's going to be a port of the Wii version of The Force Unleashed. It'll be fun to be able to play an older game like that, which was very well received in its time on the Nintendo Switch.
I'm one of those fans that just wants all the classic Star Wars games to be available on each generation of consoles, As technology progresses, it always seems funny that we can't go back and play more simpler, easier to sort of produce games, when you think about some of the other ones where they were running on much lower graphics, much lower sort of memory than modern games. And it always seems funny that, it struggles to sort of find some of these classic and beloved video games on sort of some of the newer formats. So I'm always a fan of when they sort of re-release these things, make them available for newer generations. I'm hoping that it's a trend that continues. It shouldn't be too complicated to kind of rejig these things to put them on newer platforms. And the Nintendo Switch is proving to be a very popular platform for a lot of people.
Yeah, well, some of these older games, you just want a quick and easy to access version rather than necessarily sitting down and booting everything up in front of your big screen TV. Just something handheld is quite a good way to do it, I think. All right, let's move on to talk about action figure news. There was a Hasbro Pulse live stream event a couple of days ago, and there were a few interesting products announced during that live stream. First up in the Black Series archive line, these are Black Series figures that have been previously released that are just coming out now on bubble carded packaging. We're going to be seeing C-3PO, Lando as Skiff Guard, Dengar and Emperor Palpatine. They will be all available again shortly. In fact, pre-orders are up for those at a couple of New Zealand retailers, including Mighty Ape. In the Gaming Greats line, there is a Night Brother Archer figure. This is from Jedi Fallen Order. That's a GameStop exclusive in the US, so of course it's going to be a EB Games exclusive in New Zealand. EB Games has it up with a August 2022 release date, priced at $59. Just a note, that follows on from the other Jedi Fallen Order Gaming Greats Night Brother character, Night Brother Warrior, which is also available from EB Games. Still on pre-order, that'll be coming out a few months prior to the Night Brother Archer. Interesting that they've done a couple of closely related characters from that game as gaming greats. Also exclusive to EB Games in New Zealand, I believe, is a Vintage Collection 501st Clone Trooper figure. Quite significant given the 501st Clone Trooper flashback scene in the Book of Boba Fett recently, priced at $34 at EB Games. Big news is a Vintage Collection 3.75-inch scale Boba Fett's Throne Room playset. This is a crazy impressive piece that was quite out of the blue for Hasbro. It's going to be coming out over a year from now, September 2023. But like I say, this is a gargantuan playset that has a huge backdrop component as well as a platform that basically features Jabba's throne and then the replacement Bib Fortuna / Boba Fett throne atop of it. It comes with nearly 50 odd little decorative accessory pieces to really dress the whole set, and it's the way playsets should be made, but it looks really quite desirable. The only downside to it is its price. It's $229 on Hasbro Pulse, which equates to about 345 New Zealand dollars. The only way to get stuff through Hasbro Pulse is by using a freight forwarder, But I think that's, worth considering, because if you want to buy it locally, it's going to be available at EB Games, and they have it priced at 649 New Zealand dollars, requiring a $100 deposit at this point for a September next year release. So that's $300 over the purchase price, a direct conversion purchase price from Hasbro Pulse. Of course, you'd be paying additional shipping and such like if you got it via Hasbro Pulse. But it's a little hard to fathom that would be a full $300 worth of additional costs over that base price. Yeah, a very, very cool playset on the whole, and I think people have done a little bit of math to work out that you can use it as a Jabba's throne room playset as well as a Bib Fortuna or Boba Fett throne room, depending on what sort of diorama you want to set up. And we also have the other Jabba's throne room playset, which features this sort of hand and carbonite alcove, which is basically the facing wall to this playset. So you've got quite a lot of Jabba the Hutt material available for the 3.75 inch action figure scale right now.
Yeah, I know a lot of fans were talking about whether this price was just a mistake or just
the local price, yeah.
Just a bit of a dig at fans or something like that. People noting that it's worth more than a Hot Toys 12-inch figure, which is, known for their detail and their quality, and this is a product from Hasbro. It's just a little bit frustrating when we sort of get taken for a ride locally.
It looks like it might only be available at EB Games, and they might be playing on that. It's not shown up at Mighty Ape, and we did notice that with the failed HasLab Rancor, that EB Games picked it up somehow. They got an exclusive arrangement, and Mighty Ape didn't pick it up. And that may be the case for this one as well, and then EB Games is playing on that exclusivity.
If they keep with this sort of tactic, though, like we saw with the Jedi Knight Revan, people could get burnt and you end up just going, I don't care if it costs me about the same or maybe a little bit more, a little bit under, but whether you just don't want to support EB Games when they sort of pull this type of shenanigan, you might come in a lot cheaper, you might sort of break about the same price, but I can imagine a lot of fans are kind of going to vote with their wallet, as they say, and would rather import this directly from Hasbro than to give EB Games the benefit of the satisfaction of charging nearly double.
That's really going to burn EB Games, I think, because if they think they've got exclusive sales for this product in New Zealand, they may well bring in a few of them, and they may be sitting on their shelves for a little bit, in the same way that we saw how many stores still have quite a few of the Amban Pulse rifles from Nerf sitting around, because quite a few people ended up bringing those in, but I think that overall nationally that too many were bought in for the number of fans that want them. Anyway, just a little bit of side trivia. This product is so big and complex. People were sort of comparing it to the HasLab projects. Over in Australia, I think, the newsletter from Zing, who is a component of EB Games branding for their collectibles, and they have separate Zing stores in a couple of places, actually described it as a crowd-funded project. So there is speculation that this was originally intended to be a HasLab crowd-funded project that's big enough to sort of qualify for that. Not quite as physically big as the Sail Barge or the Razor Crest, but in terms of complexity and detail and just sort of engineering, it's getting up there. If that is in fact true, then it kind of indicates that Hasbro's steering a little bit away from marketing Star Wars HasLab projects after the failure of the HasLab Rancor, which I guess is kind of understandable. At least if this has been in development for a little while, we are still going to be able to get it in this format. Alright, there were quite a few other reveals as part of this Hasbro Pulse live stream. In terms of vintage collection pipeline reveals, so these are things that don't have a date yet that will be coming up down the line. In Episode 2, Anakin Skywalker and a Mandalorian Commando. In terms of the Black Series 6-inch archive figures, we will be seeing re-releases of The Force Awakens Han Solo, A New Hope Chewbacca, Grand Moff Tarkin, and Princess Leia in her Boushh bounty hunter disguise from Return of the Jedi. In the Black Series 6-inch new sculpt, we will be seeing down the line the following characters released: Ayla Secura, a Clone Wars Season 7 version of Darth Maul, and a Rogue One Saw Gerrera. Some cool characters in there. Honing into some local store reports now. Some interesting things around the country that you may have seen yourself or may want to go and check out. A couple of new Grogu fabric patterns are available at Spotlight. I'm not sure what branches might necessarily have these. They are sold out at a few branches, but home delivery is available. This fabric is priced at $18.60 per meter, 2 different Grogu patterns. So if you're looking at some fabric-related craft projects, check out the link that we will have down below. Really interesting to see the Droids animated style 3.75-inch figures showing up on shelves of branches of the warehouse. This is an interesting development. This was originally, I think, advertised as a online-only pre-order option, but they seem to have bought quite large numbers of these figures. So we've got C-3PO, R2-D2, and Boba Fett in their sort of animated style colouring, newer sculpts though, on TVC cards, vintage collection cards that are reminiscent of the original Droids releases back in the 80s. Very colourful cards. They are quite eye-catching on the shelves, and quite fond of these myself, to be honest. So they've come into each branch in quite large numbers. They seem to be packed in cases of 8 per character, so they're fairly accessible. One thing we have noticed about this, unfortunately though, is that people who pre-ordered it are getting them arriving fairly poorly packaged in some instances, so the cards have been getting a bit dinged. People have also been saying that in some instances, even seeing that the cards are a little bit dinged and damaged because of the way they're displayed on the shelves at the warehouse. So if you want these in mint condition, it's going to pay to check out branches and be quite selective as to which ones you take, depending on if you want to keep them carded or if you're an opener for these figures.
Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating when companies want to jump into the collecting space. Obviously, Hasbro is primarily a toy manufacturer, so a lot of the Hasbro stockists are going to be toy retailers, but these are clearly not really aimed at children. They're going to be for collectors, and then it's like some of the problems that Americans have in the US, where the likes of Target and Walmart are shipping out these things, even Amazon, and treating them like toys that kids are going to rip open in 3 seconds, so they don't care if the cardboard's a bit bent. And it's really frustrating because this felt like a bit of an experiment from the warehouse to see if they could break into the collecting space, and it seems like their shipping department didn't quite get the memo here. There really is no point. There'll be a few people that will want to buy these to open, but on the whole, you're probably going to want one carded, because the whole point of these ones is the very, very reminiscent of the vintage era backing cards. Take the figures off, you're going to lose a lot of that. I know some people might want two, one to keep carded, one to open and stuff like that. But again, it's better if you can sort of choose which of the two. I know certainly when we're looking at figures to either open or figures to keep carded, you take a lot of things into consideration. The quality of the backing card, the paint job of the figure. If you're going to open it, you want it to be the best paint job and things like that. These ones, the coins can rotate a little bit in the packaging. So if you're going to keep it carded, you kind of want the coins to be sitting upright and looking pretty. So it's really sad to see collectors getting burnt by sort of trusting that the warehouse was going to branch into a new space. I really feel like if companies like the warehouse are going to sort of do this, they need to, it's a long time coming. They should have a lot of these collectible type ones in a separate section of the store rather than the toy store. It's really sad to see some of these things like the chromed figures getting beaten up in the toy department. And of course, collectors are not going to pay that much money for a special chromed metallic figures for collectible reasons if the boxes are all beaten up.
It's a shame, because it's really cool that these have been bought in by such a large retailer and are available even for purchasing online as well as in physical stores. Yeah, it would be much, much nicer if they were handled with the respect that we kind of want them to be if we want to be displaying them. Okay, a couple of other characters that were recently announced. A Black Series 6-inch Dark Trooper and a TVC Din Djarin Morak version, both from The Mandalorian, were announced a couple of weeks back. They're available for pre-order locally via Pop Guardian at popguardian.co.nz, and we've also seen them at Mighty Ape. Others will likely have them as well. The Dark Trooper is particularly cool, and I think a few people might want an army build, so you might want to get in on those pre-orders quickly. Another new wave of Black Series 6-inch figures have made their way into New Zealand pre-orders. The wave that includes the Mandalorian version of Ahsoka, a Death Watch Mandalorian from The Mandalorian, and from the Bad Batch Omega and Echo, is available for pre-order at Mighty Ape. They've got some reasonable pricing there. This wave also included the client, which hasn't shown up at Mighty Ape either. Pop Guardian does have these, but the client was the one that happened to sell out first, so I suspect that Mighty Ape have either got a different assortment somehow, or the client is short-packed, in this case assortment. So at Mighty Ape, that wave is priced at $42, but the client you'll have to get from EB Games at this point. He is $49 from EB Games. A very cool wave though, I quite like that Omega figure. She comes with her energy bow and the little lizard creature from one of the episodes.
Yeah, this is a really fun wave. I'm really hoping that good quantities of all of these characters hit New Zealand stores.
Yeah, well, a couple of retailers have them, so we should be reasonably lucky with this wave. Just keep your eye out for that client if you want to get him. You may see him in stores at EB Games when he's released down the line, but get your pre-order in now if you want to be certain. From New Zealand Mint, the latest Chibi coin released. They're coming out one a month at the moment. The last release in this line was Boba Fett from the Book of Boba Fett. Following on, not too surprisingly, is Fennec Shand from the Book of Boba Fett. This is a 1 ounce silver coin. You can get two versions of this. The standard version is priced at about $150, fluctuates depending on the currency conversions. And a $300 version that comes in a special acrylic case and has the first 100 numbers in the mintage reserved. Finally, in local store reports, a new pop vinyl figure, The Mandalorian with Darksaber, complete with metallic finish, so quite a fun variant on this figure, priced at $27 because he's got that special finish. He is available for pre-order from local retailers including Mighty Ape. So if you've been collecting Mandalorian pop vinyl figures, this figure has a very cool finish and be a nice addition to your shelf. Okay, let's talk about the finale of the Book of Boba Fett, Episode 7, In the Name of Honor, directed by Robert Rodriguez and written by Jon Favreau. I liked this on the whole. I thought it was a nice tying up of what we'd seen so far, a nice tying up of the series. You know, a few loose ends that had to be tied up. In most instances, they were pretty much what we expected. They panned out pretty much the way we expected. But there were a few cool visual surprises, and overall I liked it. I think there was a lot of hype and speculation about what this could have involved, and a lot of that didn't come to fruition. So in some ways it was a little bit more simpler than it could have been, but I think that is fine, and that was sort of a fitting way to tie things up without getting too distracted with additional cameos and additional introductions in the finale, which might have felt a little bit forced in some ways.
Yeah, I know that there's sort of a sentiment between fans where they just want to have their minds blown with all the new cameos, all the sort of new things being thrown at the end. I don't just think that not was the time. In the finale.
Yeah. In this instance, yeah.
And I know that I've seen some people talk about the fact that this series had 7 episodes, and a lot of people are trying to hold it up against The Mandalorian that has 2 full seasons. And you might argue 2 full seasons plus 2 more episodes in this one. So you're trying to sort of smush together all of the action scenes, the different cameos and character introductions in a little over 2 seasons, compared to what was essentially, if we condense it down, to primarily 5 episodes for the Book of Boba Fett in terms of the same storytelling. And there's no way you're going to be able to compare the amount of sort of breadth of storytelling and characters and action sequences in a wide series versus this one.
I'm glad that the storytelling overall was quite different. I enjoyed the Tusken Raider flashbacks, and I enjoyed the slightly shorter in terms of breadth and depth current setting that Boba Fett was trying to gain control of the city and then coming up against the Pikes. I think it was quite different storytelling, and I enjoyed that distinction.
Yeah. I think what I enjoyed more about this one was that instead of just trying to sort of sidestep and kind of do things that the audience was not expecting, it basically gave us what we did expect. And sometimes that's just fun, you know, when you give people what they want. I had seen social media posts online of lists of things that people wanted to see in the finale. You know, things like riding the Rancor, seeing Cad Bane and Boba Fett face off, you know, and things like that. And that's what they gave us. They gave us a good resolution to each of the sort of the story threads that had been built up. And I think if they were just going to throw something in there, it would feel like, I don't know, perhaps a little haphazard. We knew that when we were watching the Book of Boba Fett that it was building up to something. They hadn't been like, oh yeah, here's Bosk, here's Cad Bane, here's like random people. They waited till the very, very end to throw in Luke. Whereas in the Book of Boba Fett, we'd gotten those new character introductions, you know, all the way along. We had gotten things like Black Chrysanthemum and Luke and bits and pieces going through it.
Yeah, that gave us a lot of freshness and a lot of depth along the way.
I think if they had waited till the final episode to drop everything in it, then people would be complaining that it was too slow or it was taking too long to build up, that they want more action or something like that. It can't just be Boba Fett shooting gang leaders like every episode, or it just would become very repetitive.
All right, let's work through things in chronological order and hit on some of the highlights. So the cold open began with Boba Fett and Fennec Shand in the bombed-out sanctuary, didn't it?
Yes.
So Boba and Fennec are basically having a discussion about the fact that the spice trade needs to be stopped in Tatooine because it's having a negative impact on the population on the whole.
Well, yeah, Fennec's not quite as sort of perhaps...
resistant. She thinks there's money to be made.
Yeah, she knows, well, people get into the underground because they want to, be wealthy, be sort of climbing up from their original position. Yeah, and she knows that there's a lot of money to be made in the spice trade. Obviously Boba Fett is against this. He says it's killing our people. He doesn't want, obviously he's not exactly, the most up and up person, as Cad Bane refers to him, a cold-blooded killer that worked for the Empire, but he's above certain things. He knows that spice is just evil. It's just it victimizes the people that use it and makes the other people wealthy, and he just doesn't want it on Tatooine. Sure, he'll work with gangs and things like that, but he's sort of done with that. And I think that that's kind of a fun viewpoint. I think that if he was like, yeah, let's trade spice, it's always seen as kind of such an evil thing in the Star Wars galaxy. And I think that would have been a bit of a weird slant for Boba Fett. They're trying to sort of take him from the villain that we know him from the original trilogy and kind of make him a little bit more, not good guy aligned, but sort of redeem him a little bit.
Yeah, so Mando joins him and we have a bit of exposition along with a couple of the mods here, and I think this is just necessary story setup. And basically the point that's made here is that they think it's better to set this as a point of defense rather than going back to the palace from a point of view of optics, that they want to be seen to be supporting the people of Mos Espa rather than hiding outside of Mos Espa. So that's just setting up like a necessary story component in many ways.
I think particularly because they are in the bombed out ruins of the sanctuary, they know that if they hid in the palace, that the Pikes would basically retaliate or try and draw them out by bombing the people of the city. And they know that that's what would happen. So they are there so that they can jump into action and basically look like, okay, if the Pikes are going to bomb you, we're going to, that we're going to be here, we're going to fight, we're going to try and defend you. And if you guys are going to go down, we'll go down with you, rather than sort of, I guess, being cowardly and hiding in his sort of fortress, the big palace that's on, outside the city. So I think that was an interesting point to sort of make.
So, and it also sets them up as being separated from other armaments that they may have at their disposal for the starting point of the episode. Okay, so we switch viewpoints and we see Cad Bane walking through town.
He's going to see the mayor, who is with the Pike leadership that we have seen before. The mayor doesn't want Mos Espa destroyed. You can see the Pikes are trying to be diplomatic. They're like, oh, whoops, our bad. We bombed the sanctuary because they were trying to make a point. And he's like, no, I don't want my people killed. I don't want them bombed. You can do your spice running and stuff like that. In this conversation, the Pike leader kind of admits that they thought that they were terribly clever and killed Boba's Tusken Raider family and basically framed the Nikto swoop gang. And of course, Boba Fett took that bait and annihilated them. But the Pikes saw that as a very strategic move. It means that Boba Fett thinks and has sort of revenge on the swoopback gang. We see that he annihilated them with his starship. And so that basically took out competition because they were paying protection to the swoopback gang. And it meant that Boba Fett wasn't directly still trying to attack them. So we know that from Cad Bane's expression, he is delighted that he has this bit of information, and that he is going to use it to a devastating effect later.
Okay, so we cut through the title and we're now in Mos Eisley, where an X-Wing appears flying over the city. Don't know who this might be, but we have our suspicions. It makes a landing in Peli Motto's landing bay, and her suspicions different from ours. She thinks it is a New Republic Ranger, and when it lands, we see that the cockpit appears to be empty. This is not in fact the case. It's just that Grogu, who is in the cockpit, can't quite be seen through the viewport of the cockpit because of his size, of course. So, by way of R2-D2 providing some exposition and Peli Motto translating for the audience, we learn that Peli now knows that Baby Yoda's name is Grogu. R2-D2 declares that he has urgent business and must depart, so another bit of story set up. He can't stick around and the X-Wing can't be used as part of Boba Fett's defense. And it's also at this point that Peli, when she's holding Grogu, reveals that Baby Yoda, Grogu, is now wearing the Beskar chainmail that was gifted to him by Din Djarin.
This is a really cute scene. I really like Palemoto as a character.
Side note, she, as a secondary character, she's got more screen time and more episodes than just about anybody else. More than Greef Karga, more than Cara Dune. So yeah, she's totally ready for some product of that character.
Yeah, a Funko action figure, I'm all down for it. I thought it was fun because obviously she interacted really well with Grogu in the earlier scenes where she's looking after him while Mando is running around Tatooine. I think it's really fun seeing them together. I thought it was fun that we didn't have to wait too long to find out what Grogu's decision was. Obviously that felt like a little bit of a tease at the end of the previous episode. Oh, which one is he going to pick? And they didn't sort of dwell on it. They're like, okay.
It's a very quick and clean way to reveal it.
They're like, okay, we're at the sort of top end of the episode. Clearly he has gone to Mando and he is wearing the Beskar. It doesn't appear that he has Yoda's lightsaber at all. It looks like Luke would have held on to that, using that for training a subsequent Padawan.
Yeah. So we transition back to the Sanctuary, the ruins of the Sanctuary. So there's two main themes to this current part of the story. The first is that we see the different contingents of Boba Fett's teams patrolling different parts of Mos Espa. The mods are looking around the spaceport. We've got the Gamorreans up on the periphery of the crater. We've got Chrysanthemum monitoring the Trandoshan space. We've got some mods in the Aqualish zone of Mos Espa. And Fennec thinks that everything is set up so that nobody can sneak up on them. They've got a pretty good defense network set up. But Cad Bane has made his way in there one way or another, and 8D8, Matt Berry's droid, announces that a visitor is outside. This visitor is Cad Bane, who has made his way to the Sanctuary. Boba Fett goes out to face him. Bit of a standoff here, threats and jibes and so forth, and Cad Bane generally trying to wind Boba Fett up. Fennec trying to settle Boba Fett down. She doesn't think it's the right time for a standoff. She wants to do it on their own terms on the whole. And she's probably right, because Cad Bane's not there on his own. He has snipers who have the high ground in the same way that Boba Fett actually has Fennec at his back.
Yeah, I feel like this was a really good scene. I think it would have been not as satisfying if Boba Fett and Cad Bane only had one interaction before there is sort of a shootout or some sort of conflict. Having this kind of tension really kind of ups the ante for when, blasters do get drawn towards the end of the episode. Obviously, this is where things start to get really tense, you know. Cad Bane basically gives him an ultimatum, it's just like, nobody has to get hurt. If you guys just let us do the spice thing, we can just call it even. And Boba Fett, we know, is like, nope, he's not going to do this.
So Boba Fett stands his ground. Fennec talks him down. Cad Bane seems to realise that it's not the right time either, but I suspect that's because he knows he has an ace up his sleeve. He's got another tactic that he's about to deploy.
And it's at this moment where we get a tiny bit of a flashback, because Cad Bane and his kind of reveling and sort of being nasty, as it were, of course, lets slip that it was the Pikes, not the Nikto swoop gang, that killed Boba Fett's Tusken clan family. And we see a tiny bit of flashback, not terribly different to what we have seen before. We just get a few shots of sort of Boba coming across the encampment, which is in ruins, and seeing that sort of swoop gang insignia painted on one of the sort of torn tents. And he's now realizing that, yes, the Pikes set him up. He thought he got his revenge for the massacre, but nope. So this has only steeled him more to make sure that the Pikes do not succeed, that he needs to get his revenge on them, not just about the spice, but for his family as well. Yeah, so that means that he's definitely not going to do a deal with Cad Bane here.
It's interesting that Cad Bane is trying to rile him up in that way, because it really speaks to their relationship, I think.
It seems like technically the Pikes might have sent Cad Bane to kind of do one final negotiation, but it feels like Cad Bane gives that drop of information because he really doesn't want to negotiate or settle. He wants the opportunity to basically take on and or kill Boba Fett in sort of open conflict. He doesn't want this to go down peacefully. He wants to end it with a blaster. And we get that pretty clear here that nope, there's no negotiation. There's bad blood on both sides. This is going to come to blows.
Yeah, so Cad Bane knows that it's not the right time with so many backshooters on both sides. But like I say, he also knows, I suspect, that he's got other tactics up his sleeve. So Cad Bane does leave, and we have this montage of all the other members of Boba Fett's team actually starting to face off against the locals, and it becomes clear at this point that the other gangs of Mos Espa, the Trandoshans, the Aquilish, and the Klatooinians are in fact aligned with the Pikes, contrary to the agreement they made with Boba Fett in Boba Fett's palace earlier.
Yeah, we get a montage here where we see the different sort of deployments around the city getting ambushed. We see the Aquilish kind of pulling out weapons and starting to fire on the mod gangs. We see the Trandoshans also whipping out knives and going after Black Chrysanthemum, and the Klatooinians attack the Gamorreans, who are unfortunately at the top of a fairly big cliff.
Yeah, that's the periphery of the crater of Mos Espa. And this scene was really tense. I really was surprised at how many people survived this. I didn't feel... I mean, the mods had shelter and they were in just a straight-up gunfight with the Aquilish, but they didn't seem too outnumbered, to be honest. But clearly we saw the Gamorreans actually forced over the edge to their deaths by the Klatooinians, and then Black Chrysanthemum got absolutely swamped by Trandoshans. We know he is a fierce fighter, but he was just so heavily outnumbered that I really felt that his time was up.
Yeah, I think in this one of the sort of thoughts that came to mind was the Gamorreans had the unfortunate task of it made me think back to Return of the Jedi, when it was the unfortunate Gamorrean that we see getting munched by the Rancor. So we get an impression of the threat danger of what could happen here. And yet again, unfortunately, it's the poor Gamorreans that are the ones being sort of sacrificed to show the real threat here. The red shirts, as you will, the unnamed characters getting killed or experiencing the danger to show us the sort of level of threat that is there and present for the other heroes.
Yeah.
It was sort of funny, like back in the old days, we sort of think of the Gamorreans as being not so intelligent and things like that, but I was sad to see these ones get killed. They were loyal, they always sort of helped Boba Fett, not that they had names or had sort of subtitled dialogue so we knew what they were saying at times, but they were, obviously we don't want to see anybody on Boba Fett's side getting eliminated. Yeah.
So we don't know if this all happened in a coordinated manner, but we presume there was some sort of a signal, because parallel to all of this, the Pikes are actually approaching the sanctuary. Boba and Mando have a bit of a conversation just inside the door of the sanctuary. They know that they are facing off against a pretty tough battle. They know that things are starting to go down because the mods have been able to communicate with them. And Mando declares that he's going to stick around even if it is a fight to the death. He says we'll both die in the name of honor. This is the way.
Yeah, I thought that was a really fun scene. This was kind of setting up the fact that the Mando and Boba Fett are really kind of their teammates at this point, that he's not an underling.
Well, yeah, let's finish the sentence because, actually, I'll just jump in and interject, because that's the really cool thing about that, just talking about them as a team, is that, Din Djarin says this is the way. Boba Fett says you don't really believe all that banter fodder, and Din says yes, I do. And Boba actually says, good. He knows he can count on him as a consequence of that.
Yeah, it was kind of fun because we know in some of the other episodes in The Mandalorian that, some people have a bit of a grudge against Boba Fett. To the likes of Cosca Reeves and Bo-Katan, he's a little bit of an imposter because he's a clone. And also they have a grudge against clones because of the devastation that the Clone Wars had upon the galaxy. And obviously the clones eventually became the Empire. So for a lot of people, the Empire represents evil, and his voice reminds them of that. So it's really quite fun to see the Mandalorian and just sort of seeing the honor between them. They know that they could probably die because of this, but they know that it's kind of like the honorable Mandalore way, that to die in battle is kind of like, the way that you go down, you don't die of old age type thing. And I really quite like that moment.
So, Boba and Din are having this conversation about honour and fighting to the death if necessary. And we haven't really mentioned, but during all of this, the Mayor's Major Domo is actually in the background as a prisoner. They've brought him with him rather than leaving him in one place. And at this point, the Major Domo pipes up. By way of describing his education on Coruscant, he claims to be good at negotiating and thinks he can negotiate with the Pikes. Boba Fett seems to agree with this, but he's actually got a slightly more complex plan, and he lets the Major Domo go out to present his terms for surrender. And the Mayor's Major Domo goes out thinking he's going to be presenting terms for surrender. But of course, what's actually happening is that Boba Fett is setting him up as a distraction. He is not going to surrender, so he has no terms of surrender. Major Domo, character I very much enjoy. I actually enjoy his style. I enjoy his characterization. I think the actor did a great, fun job with him. He goes out there and makes a very flowery presentation to the Pikes, and then he gets to the data pad where he's going to present Boba Fett's terms, and the terms for his surrender are straight up nothing, and then a string of insults where the Pikes are going to fertilize the fields of Tatooine.
Yeah, I always think it's a tricky balance for actors when you're trying to play those kind of sleazy, people-pleasing type characters, but at the same time, you've actually got to play a likable character. Otherwise, the sort of the charm and sort of it wouldn't actually work in a real-world scenario.
Obviously, complex charisma. Yeah.
He's gotten to where he is because he is likable and does kind of work miracles and kind of with deals anybody. And things like that. Yeah, and I really like his mannerisms, his expressions, the way that he sort of carries himself and gestures and things like that. And even though he's kind of like a bit of a slimy guy, he sort of does whatever it takes. Clearly he's only piping up and talking about negotiating because Boba and Mando are about to charge out the door and go down in glory, and he really doesn't want to die. So this is his ploy to basically survive. Yeah. But he does it in kind of a way that he's trying to be he's helpful, and he's gonna solve the problems for them. And I think that that's kind of fun. And even though of course he was sort of on the mayor's side, obviously the mayor is the bad guy here, I still kind of didn't want him to get killed. There's a moment where the Pikes are realizing that he's basically reading out a list of insults and that Boba Fett is not going to do anything, and they kind of start to raise their blasters at him, and I'm like, I don't actually kind of want him to die. He's kind of a fun character. So I was very glad when
like I said, this next scene really kicked butt. I thought it was really cool that during the Major Domo's presentation and realization and the impact it had on the audience, as you say, we got to the point where it looked like he was in jeopardy, but we didn't really want him to die. But during that brief moment, Boba and Din had been maneuvering into position, and things really went down quite cool at this point.
Yeah, so just before the Pikes managed to get a blaster shot off, because that would clearly have killed the Major Domo because he's standing right in front of them. And we see Boba and Mando up in the sky with using their jetpacks. This is always quite fun. I don't know whether this is a combination of CG or wire work. It always looks really realistic in this scenario.
There was some cool wire work in there. Yeah, it maybe enhanced at a few points, but it definitely came down on wires, and it worked really cool seeing both these two different armored people with slightly different styles and slightly different weapons really working together in a coordinated fashion. So we see them taking out quite a large number of Pikes with just an array of armaments at their disposal. We see some fun choreographed use of Boba Fett's new rockets, whistling birds. Boba Fett's got a wrist launcher for a small rocket.
Yeah, this was really quite fun. Obviously, we know that Mandalorians thrive on weapons. Weapons are my religion. And here we finally get to see two very expert Mandalorians really going to town with their weapons. But we know that there are a large number of Pikes, and even
I think Boba said something like they just keep coming at this point, because as many as they shoot, they're just piling in from all the side streets.
Yeah, and obviously the Pikes are sort of a gang organization where the higher-ups are safe in their pad, and they're just sending wave after wave of underlings to sort of go fight the issues for them. And just when we think things are starting to get... Because that's the thing, obviously, with projectiles and things like that, you're going to run out of whistling birds, you're going to run out of wrist rockets and things like that. And just when we think things are getting a little bit tight, we see the people of Freetown coming around the corner all piled up into a big speeder, that they have come, that the town and Cobb Vanth haven't let them down, though notably Cobb Vanth isn't in this little convoy.
Yeah. So what happens first is we actually hear heavy blaster fire. It's a direct use of basically ATST weaponry sound effects, which was really cool. So we knew it was heavier than just handheld weapons. And the speeder, which is a converted civilian speeder with a gun mount on top, shows up. But like you say, it's the bartender who's mounting the top gun. Cobb Vanth isn't visible, so we're left a little bit unsure about his current position. About the same time, Kassantan makes an appearance, trying to get back to safe ground. He's getting completely hammered. He's got quite a distance to traverse. I think he first shows up by throwing around a few Pikes. Just slightly off. He's off camera. He's hidden behind some buildings, and the Pikes are just being thrown around. But as he's making his approach across the open ground to the doorway to the sanctuary, he's getting quite hammered. And again, I was surprised that he had survived his first assault, but he was taking so many blows here that I thought he was going to go down at this point once again.
Yeah, he's another character where I really didn't want to see their demise in this series. I think they're fun. I wanted to see more of them. We know that he must have been able to survive a fair amount of combat to get to the sort of the legendary gladiator status that he does. So I was kind of on the fence. Am I worried that he's going to go down, or of course he can overcome this, because he wouldn't be a sort of champion gladiator without taking a few hits. So I am glad that we do see him kind of making his way to the rest of the kind of the assembled team as we have it here.
So Black Kassantan's safe. We see the remaining Pikes that are out in the open take cover for some reason. And Mando, through the enhanced vision of his helmet visor, sees something approaching from around the corner of a building. These turn out to be large, four-legged, heavy-armoured walking tanks, 2 of them, and just as they round the corner and take up position in front of the sanctuary, they activate droid-style shields, which turn out to be quite impenetrable. Quick note on these, I think they refer to them as Scorpion droids. They are known elsewhere as Scorpinex. These droids are 100% based on the concept art for Droidicars by Doug Chiang that was seen in the Art of Episode 2 book, which came out many years ago, and they've actually been used a number of times in Star Wars material. They've been described as Colicoid Annihilator droids in the 2006 edition of the New Essential Guide to Droids. So once again, it's really fun to see this old material being repurposed and reused in this way. So they're an established design in the Star Wars universe, and on that basis I think they fit very well, and their use sort of suits the story at this point in time well as well.
Yeah, I always appreciate it when when they sort of take the approach of there's no point designing a brand new thing when there's plenty of cool designs to bring in. It's fun for the fans. They don't need to sort of spend ages trying to design something new that feels like it would fit in the aesthetic. I like the fact that we know how formidable droidicars are, particularly their shields. I always think back to the scene in episode 1 where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan are sort of faced with the droidicars in the hallway right at the start of the film, and rather than try and sort of take them on because their shields are quite formidable, they sort of force speed run down the hall and escape rather than try and fight them on. So we immediately know, if you are a Star Wars fan and have watched the prequels, that the shielding is going to be a major issue for these guys, that they don't really have too many means to combat these droids.
They're pretty insurmountable, and even have... Well, so what goes down at this point is Boba fires a full-on rocket at it, and Din Djarin uses a flamethrower at one point. Nothing is working. Occasionally it looks like it might, but when the smoke clears or the flames clear, that nothing has been dented. And in fact, the droids, they blow up, they take out the speeder that they were using as a defense shield. Mando even tries to use his darksaber, but that just bounces off the shield. They have a bit of a conversation, because we know that sometimes shields in Star Wars can protect against fast-moving projectiles and energy weapons, but slow-moving objects can get through them. They have a bit of a conversation along those lines, but they're still not able to breach the shields despite that knowledge on the whole. So that's just necessary exposition to sort of explain why they're sort of up against this insurmountable foe at this point.
I had a feeling that the darksaber wasn't going to be useful here.
Not directly.
Because Jedi would just stick their lightsaber through the energy field and destroy the droids within. They wouldn't be that. And we know that it doesn't seem to be a terribly hard concept within Star Wars to make a shield that may, or at least to a very good effect, stand up to lightsabers. When we see the Paz Vizsla and Din Djarin fight in a previous episode, Paz Vizsla is holding his own using a small shield on his forearm that is obviously able to block the darksaber, which is essentially a lightsaber. So we know that there is, shielding and stuff like that in Star Wars. I know this is the point where people have noted, why doesn't Boba Fett go and get Slave 1? It would have heavy guns, it would have seismic charges and stuff like that. And I think what the sort of point that I feel is maybe not quite as strongly alluded to here, is that he really doesn't want to sort of annihilate the city here. We see sort of the devastating effect of what seismic charges can do, and I think dropping that within an atmosphere in a city, he would sort of end up killing a few townspeople and sort of leveling a good chunk of the city, and that's not kind of the heroic outcome we're going for here. Same with the sort of turrets. There's no way to sort of take a starship and sort of spray fire, and we don't know to a certain extent that the gunships would work either. We see him use his sort of jetpack mounted rocket, and it does the sort of moment in Rogue One where we see a lot of smoke. Did it work? Did it not? Like when they're sort of using the big rocket launcher against the head of the AT-AT in Rogue One, and then the smoke clears and no, it just kind of made a lot of fuss and it didn't really dent it. So we see that here. So we're not really sure how they're going to sort of beat it. We've got some few ideas, but it looks to our heroes that this is going to be a problem that they don't really know how to cope with.
So Mando has to fall back on plan B. He jets off to enact that. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we find out very shortly. Along those lines, just as that's sort of happening, Cassandra's trying to get through, just through raw strength, pushing, using his electro knuckle dusters that don't work either. Coincidentally, this is where Peli Motto turns up, in one of the droid rickshaws, complete with a pit droids in tow, and soon to be revealed, Baby Yoda actually hiding safely hidden under a rug.
Yeah, she's looking for Mando and she sort of finds him, and she doesn't sort of immediately see what's going on because he's like, no, go away. And she's like, what? We just got here type thing. When she finally sees what the fuss is all about and why she can't be there, she sort of gets her droid to sort of hightail it out, and the Mando kind of goes along with her. Obviously, he doesn't want to see her get shot or wounded by the big droids. We sort of go back to the other group, obviously the townspeople and things like that, and they are sort of cornered. They have kind of been retreating through the city, and we find them kind of behind.
The Scorpion droids focused on them. They chase them down some of the streets.
Yes, at this point, the two droids have kind of splintered off. One is kind of pushing the townspeople and the people of Freetown and the mods in one direction, and the other one was kind of focused on Boba, Mando, and Black Chrysanthemum and that kind of corridor over there.
I think it's at that point where there's some important strategic dialogue. Sophie Thatcher's character Drash makes a point of noting that they can't retreat any further. They're behind some pretty solid concrete walls. She notes that if they keep retreating further, they're going to be completely backed into a corner, so they need to hold their ground at that point. So Drash, along with one of the Freetown snipers, are going to try and get to some high ground to distract the Scorpion droids and try and work something out from that point.
Yeah, she swaps weapons with the bartender. The bartender came equipped with a long sniper rifle. Her little sort of pull-out blaster is not really going to do much from a distance, so they swap, and she and the woman from Freetown decide to kind of sneak out the back, and so that they can get a higher up vantage point to try and sort of act as a sniper high up. It's at this point that we finally jump back to Mandalorian, Peli Motto, and she finally reveals that Grogu is actually sitting next to her, sort of covered up. Obviously, she was trying to sort of keep him a little bit hidden, and we get sort of a cute reunion between the Mando and Grogu. Obviously, it's taken him a little bit. He thought that Grogu had sort of chosen the life of a Jedi and he'd never really see him again. So it was kind of a fun moment when he realizes that he's come back, and obviously he's not really going to stay at a distance here. At this point, the droid sort of shoots, I think, the droid that's carrying the sort of rickshaw vehicle. We get sort of a big tumbling over moment, and Mando kind of twists in the air to catch Grogu so that he doesn't sort of land on the ground. We do see that Peli does unfortunately hit the ground. It appears that she spits out a tooth, which I think is kind of fun. It shows that she's sort of a really sort of hardy woman. As we've seen in the previous episode, she's lived on Tatooine all her life. You've got to be sort of made of thick stuff to sort of be a self-employed sort of business person on Tatooine. So she clearly knows her way around blasters and droids and things like that. So yeah, at this point we finally get a little bit of a hint of what Boba Fett has been up to. We hear some kind of vague roaring and footsteps, akin to sort of a little bit like the sort of Jurassic Park sort of rumbling footsteps. We know something heavy's coming, and then we kind of get a few glimpses, a little bit of a back, a little bit of a claw, and then of course we're like, yes, we're finally going to get to see the Rancor. And not just on the street, it's actually climbing on the buildings. It's up kind of high, which is really quite fun.
Yeah, clambering over the buildings. It's really shown quite that it's quite agile, that it's not a slow-moving ground-based animal, that it's quite an agile creature that can move quite fast and can ambulate over different structures and things, which is interesting.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of sort of fast action here as I was trying to take notes through this sort of... So we're dealing with the droid here that is sort of focused more on the Mandalorian, not the one that's going after the townspeople. So we've got the Rancor here, and between sort of Boba Fett, the Rancor, the Mando, and even a bit of help from Grogu, they managed to disable it. Mando managed to get inside the shield. He uses the Darksaber. Grogu manages to pull a piece of the droid's leg.
Yeah, I know this is sort of a real fast moving one. There's one really cool part that I really, really enjoyed. Din looks like he's going to get an upper hand against the droid, but he gets knocked to the ground. And it looked really quite cool, I thought, when the Scorpion droid was reared up on its hind legs and it was going to come just straight down with its front legs onto Din. I think that's what activated Grogu in terms of his, sense of needing to defend Din Djarin against this droid.
Yeah, one of the legs comes down and we hear that kind of metallic ting
that it
hits him in the thigh, and he obviously winces because while the leg won't pierce the armor, there's just the pressure or, don't want to sort of crush your leg.
So the droid gets back up for a second attack at the end. There's obviously just with impact, even with Beskar, if that hits you in the chest, then it's game over.
And then we see sort of Grogu. I thought it was neat that they didn't try and sort of give him something new and different.
He wasn't overpowered. He didn't just squish it. All he manages to do is pull out a key component of one of its rear legs that it's balanced on, and it just stumbles and falls backwards. That made sense.
Yeah, it felt like the way that he has been able to sort of force pull the little metal ball that he really wanted. So he sort of picked a component from the leg that is not exactly round shaped, but it makes you think that it's sort of like the ball that he wants to hold, and pulls it. And that's obviously going to be enough to sort of set it off kilter and disable it as such. And then we see Boba Fett riding his amazing Rancor, kind of finishing the droid by sort of grabbing it and ripping it apart, which was really satisfying to see. Obviously, I was super, super looking forward to seeing the Rancor, and I think that they used it to great effect here.
Yeah, well, so one of the droids is down at this point, and the Rancor's going to town on the pikes. We do see one of the pikes getting eaten, classic original trilogy style, by the Rancor in a few gulps. Yeah,
this is at the point where we see that Drash and her friend are up on the roof trying to make a sort of a last stand, and the Rancor comes sort of crashing through a building. Obviously, we've taken down one of the droids. It's time to take on the second one. And we get a bit of a sort of a King Kong-esque fight, but in a much more sort of believable way. It's not overblown, it's believable. We see the droid getting knocked down. We see the Rancor take a few hits. I was a little bit worried about the Rancor. It takes a few big sort of hits to the chest. We see it sort of recoil in pain. I was like, no, we've just gotten this cool Rancor. I really don't want to see this one go down. And then we finally sort of see it finally kind of getting a little bit of an upper hand on the droid and pushes its claw through it appears to be sort of the red central eye of the droid. And I think this is the bit where sort of Boba's like, yeah, go on, do it. And it sort of rips it apart. Yeah. And then, of course, we see that Mando and Grogu are together because he was able to sort of rescue him from the droid. They're shooting at the pikes. And at this point, the pikes are now the main enemy. The droids are disabled. They're ripped apart. So now it's time to make sure that the pikes don't sort of assemble their forces and start to sort of take on the people one-on-one. And this is where we get some fun classic Rancor action. Like you said, eating a pike. We see one thrown off into the distance and another one basically just absolutely smashed into the ground, which sort of felt like, it made me think of some of the moments in some of the Jurassic Park films where one of the big sort of meat-eating dinosaurs just absolutely steps on or otherwise crushes a human. So we sort of see the Rancor having a little bit of fun here, doing what Rancors do best. And then this is when Cad Bane decides to show up.
Yeah, now he by luck or by knowledge, manages to know that he's got a weapon that will work against the Rancor. His flamethrower doesn't have to do a lot of damage, but it has enough of an impact to scare the Rancor to make it back off and to not attack him. So pretty straightforward there, but again, makes solid sense. So Boba Fett at this point no longer has the Rancor for defense or for attack.
Yeah, I think even though we know that if Boba Fett had his Rancor, it would be pretty easy to fight against Cad Bane. You just munch. I don't think that would be very satisfying for the audience. We want to see these two sort of ultimate bounty hunters go straight just one-on-one without distractions. So the Rancor has done what it needed to do. It took on the droids, and now it can just sort of run off and just sort of excuse itself from the scene. So the audience and everyone else just gets these two just one-on-one. Is it this point where when Boba Fett sort of gets thrown off the Rancor while it's running away, that I don't know why I didn't specifically notice it. Perhaps it's deliberately not supposed to be obvious, but it's at this point that I noticed that Boba Fett has his gaffy stick on his back.
Which he did in prior,
yeah.
He also happens to have reloaded his jetpack. He doesn't get to use it again, but just an interesting side note.
Yeah. And of course, we're going to get a little bit of dialogue because it wouldn't be Cad Bane with a little bit of backwards and forwards. Boba says lines along the lines of, he's not a little boy any longer and you're an old man. Of course, referencing the fact that Cad Bane is older here. He looks a little bit older.
Just do the math. He's in his 70s, technically.
This is quite a long time after the Clone Wars. Obviously, Boba Fett was a young boy when we saw Cad Bane in the Clone Wars. We saw young Boba, sort of young clone, sort of cadet level. So we sort of see that, it's going to be interesting to sort of see how this fight goes. They're both very skilled, and we get sort of a classic quick draw moment here.
Cad Bane actually gets the first shot off, so despite his age, he still has his reflexes, has the upper hand over Boba Fett, so Boba takes a hit or two to his chest plate, gets onto the ground, and it looks like Cad Bane, I think it's at that point that Boba Fett's weapon is actually knocked from his hands, and so Boba's lying on the ground weaponless. He's taken a couple of hits to his armor, so not life-threatening at this point, but he's clearly unarmed and vulnerable.
I think this is the point where it looks like Cad Bane sort of steps on his arm.
He does.
So that he can't sort of reach. So it's a classic kind of move. Make sure that the person can't sort of wriggle away from you and sort of twist around or get their weapon back. He makes a comment, something like, you've still got your father's blood in your veins. Perhaps that's a diss. The fact that Jango was defeated, in front of him, kind of basically digging the knife in a little bit further. Obviously, that is going to be a sore spot, a bitter point for Boba Fett. And Cad Bane always seems to delight in being mean, not just with his weapons, but with his words as well. Not that Boba Fett needed riling up at this moment, but that certainly does seem to kind of steal his resolve. We see Cad Bane literally rip the helmet off. We don't know if that specifically has wider meaning outside of the Mandalorian's clan, whether it is seen as a big insult to a Mandalorian to have your helmet removed by somebody else. We don't know if only Din Djarin's clan would feel that, or whether that's just a big diss in general.
I just read that as Cad Bane wanting to look him in the eye when he executes him, and Boba Fett to know. He wants to see, I think he wants to read in Boba Fett's face that Boba Fett knows he's defeated. Yeah. He just wants to relish in that moment. That was my read of that moment.
Yeah. And then, of course, at this point, when we see a weapon being pointed and we're like, no, this isn't the way that it's going to go down, then we see Boba's free arm manage to sort of reach behind him, and he whips out his gaffy stick and kind of knocks Cad Bane back with the sort of momentum of him sort of whipping the gaffy stick out. And we know that, yes, he doesn't have his rifle, but we know that at this point he is physically stronger than Cad Bane. He might not be quite the quick draw, but he is stronger and he knows how to use melee weapons. We don't really see Cad Bane. His quick draw is Cad Bane's strength. So it doesn't take too much of a scuffle here.
I guess at that point, Cad Bane had his blaster in Boba Fett's face. He wouldn't have been expecting, and he had one hand on his arm. And I think it was just an unexpected move. I think is part of the reason why I was able to be so successful. Boba executed it with incredible fluidity and disarmed Cad Bane and got him back on the ground. And I just think it was partly the speed and familiarity Boba Fett had with that weapon, plus the fact that Cad Bane wasn't expecting it to go down that way from that point.
Yeah, we know that there's a little bit of sort of arrogance and I'm the best, I can't be beaten attitude to Cad Bane.
He was just relishing in the moment.
And we know that Tusken Raiders and their combat style must be fairly formidable. They wouldn't be seen as the sort of fearsome tribe and sort of clan that they are if their staff weapons were not a match for rifles. Yes, we do see Tusken Raiders with rifles, but we know that under close combat, gaffy sticks tend to win out. Obviously, we know that story from episode 2, where, Kleeglas is talking about the number of men that went out into the desert to rescue Shmi, and they don't succeed. Only a few of them manage to survive. So even taking all the blasters and all the weaponry out into the desert, you're still not really going to come out the best up against Tuskens. And I think that sort of really plays in here. We know, yes, he's not a true Tusken, but he's basically an adoptive. He's trained. He's spent what appears to be a number of years with them. And so I think that seeing all those flashbacks and seeing how long and his bonding with the Tuskens really comes into this final moment here. We see him sort of with the facial expression that we've seen when he was taking on the stormtroopers in The Mandalorian on Tython, and he just nails Cad Bane in the chest. And we get sort of a moment where, yes, Cad Bane is dead. We don't need to see a big pool of blood because this is still Star Wars. We don't see a lot of blood in Star Wars franchise outings, but yes, we know he's dead.
He plunges it in pretty solidly, and I saw people, as you'd expect if you're a solid Cad Bane fan, bemoaned that this wasn't a fitting death, but my take on it was that, what else do you really expect? It's a showdown between Boba Fett and Cad Bane. It's precisely Cad Bane's wheelhouse to be engaged in a street fight along these lines rather than something a little bit more complex. That's just not his story arc. And, it is, we are approaching the end of his story arc at this point in his life, in his 70s.
Yeah, I think the thing that people were maybe grumbling about was the fact that it felt like we had just gotten live action Cad Bane. And then it was kind of like, okay, we got a couple of episodes and now he's dead.
And that's fair.
But what I think people sort of forget is that this is the end of his sort of lifespan, his story. He's now old. So we can't really have too much beyond this point.
But there's a lot of Star Wars stories taking place in parallel.
That doesn't stop him from turning up in live action in any other storyline that's set just before this time point.
Or any time between season 7 of Clone Wars where we last saw him. All it means is we're not going to see him subsequently in other episodes of The Mandalorian. That's all it means.
Yeah. I still think that there's a pretty good chance that we could see him turn up in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. Looking back at the Clone Wars, when Obi-Wan goes undercover as Reiko Hardeen, they really come inches from blows when he's sort of working with Cad Bane in disguise in those episodes. And I think it would be really fun to see those two coming together. Obviously, that would have been when Cad Bane was younger. He would look a little bit more closer to his Clone Wars appearance. I know some people thought, he looks a little bit different. But then if you look at sort of realistic translations of Clone Wars art, it's always just a little bit stylized. It's not a one-to-one representation. I think he looked really, really good in this iteration. He is depicted as older. I think it worked really well. I loved that it wasn't a CG face, that it was a real articulation. And in order to do that, it has to match human sort of proportions a little bit closer. I thought the teeth, I thought the way that his sort of the menace in his expressions worked really, really well. So I didn't really have any issues with the portrayal. I thought the way that the character walked was really close to the way that we'd sort of see that sort of slow swagger, his sort of cowboy coat sort of whipping behind him, the way that he would always kind of draw his coat back to sort of reach for it. And to be honest, I think a death any other way would have kind of diminished his sort of reputation. Quick draw is his thing. It wouldn't suddenly be that Boba Fett's just randomly beat him in a quick draw. We've already seen how fast he was. We know that Cobb Vanth was very, very quick, because we saw him take out multiple pikes before they managed to get the upper hand on him. But Cad Bane was able to beat Cobb Vanth in a quick draw.
But it makes sense that Boba Fett took him down via a new skill that he's learned since he last saw Cad Bane.
So it would be surprising Cad Bane wouldn't really expect. He hasn't seen Boba Fett working with the staff weapon. He wouldn't be expecting him. He knows that he was with the Tusken Raiders for a while. Clearly he sees that he's got a gaffy stick, but it wouldn't be that he would know what to expect there. So I think it works. I know everyone kind of is like, I don't want to see Star Wars characters die, but we know this isn't the end for these particular characters. They will keep showing up,
so, there's still plenty more of post-Clone Wars era Bad Batch, and Cad Bane still exists in that timeline, so that's...
And I think everyone knew that there was going to have to be a showdown between these two characters, and you can't have an epic showdown and then them both walk away. That's just a standoff, not a sort of, it would just be unsatisfying if both of them lived. I'm like, you can't put the two of them together and have this conflict and then just having them walk away and then just like, no, that's going to be totally unsatisfying for everyone involved. And sure, we don't want to see our favorite characters go down, but to be honest, I'd rather see young Cad Bane adventures. I don't need to see more old Cad Bane. I want to see more of him doing stuff. Like if we were going to get a Yoda live action series, we don't need to see Dagobah Yoda, making soup in his hut. We want to see young Yoda, like in the High Republic era or something like that, at the height of his powers. So if we know that they have all of the tools at their disposal to do a slightly younger live action Cad Bane, and he could show up anywhere. Heck, they could just announce, look, we're getting a Cad Bane series or something like that. If there's enough of sort of fan support for the character. Who knows at this point? Clearly Lucasfilm likes to pull from what has worked really well within the fandom. So who knows? We could get like a whole sort of interesting tale on an offshoot there. But anyway, I thought it was a fitting death.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It felt triumphant that Boba Fett got revenge. He's sort of the most... It wouldn't be fitting for Boba Fett to kind of kill the Pike leader. It's not a show of skill. This is sort of just a businessman. They're not strong in combat. So I thought it was fitting that the sort of biggest triumphant moment for Boba Fett would be to defeat Cad Bane rather than just a random Pike.
Yeah. Okay, so in parallel to that, it was interesting that the Rancor, because of the flames that were Cad Bane's flamethrower, it got a little bit scared and agitated, and it's actually become a threat in its own right. So the Rancor's on the rampage, trying to escape from what it sees as a threat. The people of Freetown are shooting at it. Mando tells them to stop shooting at it. He knows how significant it is to Boba Fett and that it is just a scared creature at this point. And Mando passes Grogu off to Peli Motto for safety, and he jets up to try and stop the Rancor himself. It looks like he's going to be able to achieve this, but of course we know that Rancors bond with singular people on the whole. So even though Mando manages to get a hold of the chains and get on the back of the Rancor's not interested in that, and Mando is thrown to the ground after having been nearly eaten with his Beskar helmet, basically saving him from the Rancor's crushing jaw.
Yeah, there's a couple of moments in here that I wasn't able to take notes because I was trying to sort of watch and take notes as well. In these moments here, we have the mayor's majordomo kind of being revealed, cowering in the thing, and he kind of teams up with Peli Motto, kind of just trying to have somebody else to kind of hide behind. So we get some sort of fun little moments here.
Nice head tails.
Yeah, where she sort of comments on his head tails, and the two of them kind of team up. So we get a little bit of a humorous commentary from Peli as she is holding Grogu, watching Mando try to sort of tame the Rancor. And I thought it was really interesting that they sort of reiterated that no, Boba Fett is the only one that can ride the Rancor, the only one that's bonded, and that even though Mandalorian is really sort of skilled, that clearly the Rancor is having none of it and tries to bite him. And this looked like a practical effect. It looked like they really did sort of use some sort of mouth trying to bite down. Obviously the Beskar is going to save him, and it's just kind of like, okay, if I can't eat you, I'm just going to throw you away.
So yeah, Din Djarin does get thrown quite violently away, and the Rancor's back at ground level at that point. Grogu sees what's going on. Once again, he sees Din Djarin in jeopardy, but he knows what to do.
Yes, I thought this might be a moment like we saw in the first season of The Mandalorian, where Grogu uses his powers to kind of subdue the Mudhorn so that the Mandalorian can ultimately kill it. I was really, really worried that might be sort of an echo here, that the two of them team up to defeat a foe. Thankfully, I was not correct here. Grogu kind of goes up to it. It kind of gets down low to look at him really close, kind of snorts really, and we kind of get this cute scene where you sort of see the breath kind of blowing Grogu's ears and the sand around him, but he uses the Force to kind of pacify it. And I think maybe this is supposed to sort of show that perhaps some of Luke's teachings have kind of seeped in.
I think it demonstrates a change in his ways. I think it demonstrates a maturation of his skills and his perspective.
Yeah, that instead of trying to sort of attack it, he is calming the creature. And
yeah, he's definitely learned some Jedi philosophies and Jedi concepts as well as Jedi skills. And I think that's what's coming through.
We know that Luke was imparting a lot of Yoda's wisdom. That is predominantly where Luke Skywalker would have gotten most of his Jedi teachings. And we know that Yoda says, use the Force for knowledge and defense, never attack. Yeah. So even though we don't see Luke using those specific words to Grogu, we get a feel from this scene that is part of what he would have been imparting to Grogu. He taught him to leap from the Jedi training remote as a defense mechanism. Obviously, Grogu decided to attack it a little bit, but it was a teachable moment.
But that was still early on.
Yeah. And so we get some really, really cute moments here. So after kind of using the Force to subdue the Rancor and make it go to sleep, he kind of walks up to it, pats the Rancor on the nose, and then kind of, because he's obviously used a fair amount of the Force and he kind of gets tired from this, he kind of falls to the ground and goes to sleep, sort of almost curled up right next to the Rancor. So it's a really cute sort of juxtaposition of tiny, tiny creature and very big, scary creature just kind of sleeping there. So
earlier on, just to explain the next jump in viewpoint, Fennec Shand and Boba Fett had a conversation, and Fennec said she was going to go to the Pikes headquarters in Mos Eisley, and we haven't actually seen her since then, so we don't know how long it took her to get there. But we get a transition in the scene to show us the Stormtrooper helmets on sticks, and I think this is just to convey to us that we are now looking at Mos Eisley, and in fact we are in the leader of the Pikes headquarters, where the gang leaders and the mayor still are. Gang leaders not happy that things have not gone down quite as planned.
Yeah, the Pikes are talking about that they're going to leave the planet, and everyone else there is like, no, you promised, we're all going to work together. We basically backstabbed Boba Fett because we were going to side with you.
Work, and now you're bailing on us.
Yeah, and they were like, no, you promised that we would be welcome here, and having our people being eaten by Rancors and being shot at is not being welcome. So it's at this point that we get a little bit of it's sort of reminiscent of Anakin taking out the Separatist leaders in episode 3. Of course, slightly different scenario here, but we see from sort of from the shadows, we don't see who is doing it, but we kind of guess at this point. We see some loud blaster bolts sort of echoing through the room and taking out the crime lords.
Shot.
Yes. And then the mayor, the hammerhead is kind of a little bit panicked, sort of running around the room, and Noose come down and grabs him around the neck, and he gets yanked up into the sort of rafters, and then we sort of the feet kicking and going still. He's been hanged. So now we are just left with the main Pike leader. He's kind of looking around the room before suddenly lurching and then drops down, and then we see that Fennec is sort of crouched behind him with a knife that she managed to stab him in the back as kind of a last brutal move. So Fennec, the master assassin, managed to take out all of the people that kind of conspired to betray Boba Fett and herself. So she has kind of wrapped that up, taken out all the sort of people. And I think this was really fitting. I don't think we necessarily needed to see Boba Fett do this. I feel like throughout the series we have seen that Boba and Fennec are a team, that it's not just a crime lord and his underlings, that she is very much his equal, balanced. She might be sort of working for him as such, but I think that this was a neat moment, having her showing off her skills, holding her own, and it kind of worked so that Boba had his big moments with the townspeople. I think the townspeople needed to see him in action. They didn't necessarily need to see Fennec out in the open. I think she works very well as kind of an assassin from the shadows. So I think this was in her wheelhouse, and it didn't need to be a public display, but she just took them all out. And maybe maybe it wasn't so good for the townspeople to kind of see their leader basically assassinating the mayor. She just sort of did it undercover, away from everyone else. But obviously, yes, now everyone that's kind of been on the opposite side of our heroes here is taken care of.
Yeah.
And that's not quite where this episode ends.
No, a little bit of a time jump. Everyone's caught their breath. We open on a citywide shot with the passenger ships coming into land, and everyone around the city is just basically fixing everything up. I think this is just to indicate that they've succeeded and life is starting to get back to normal. Boba Fett and Fennec Shand are walking down the streets as this is all going on. People are bowing to him. It's not too much of a time jump because he's still in pain from the battle. Indicates that because his bowing with his arm across his chest seems still painful to him. People are giving him fruit and Maluron from the look of it. And Boba and Fennec approach Kassantan and a couple of the mods who happen to be in the vicinity. Boba gives the Maluron to the Wookiee. I think just under their breath, one of the mods asks if Kassantan's going to share that. No, he's not. He eats it himself.
There is a moment in this where Fennec says something about, you need to be in the Bacta tank, and he's like, oh, it's being used. And I thought it was kind of interesting that they don't necessarily reference it. At first I thought it was Black Kassantan because during the fight he basically says that they're basically like, oh, I'll give you a good long soak in my Bacta tank later, because obviously you could
see he was a mess. He took so many hits, you could see his wounds.
Yeah, but then of course we see him in the street and he looks like he's doing better. So then we have another fun little scene after we've seen that everything looks like it's getting back to business and normalcy on Tatooine. We sort of pan up to the sky. We see sort of the twin suns in the background, and we see Mando's ship just sort of traveling into space. And Grogu has his little silver knob, which Mando gave him in the sort of scuffle as something to sort of hold on to, and he's tapping on his little dome. I thought it was really fun that they did sort of show that, yes, the empty droid port that has been sort of turned into a little small sort of seat in the Naboo starfighter is indeed perfect for Grogu to sit in. And he's tapping on his little window with the knob, and Mandalorian is saying no, and then finally gives in to the insistent little knocking. And then of course he flicks the switch and they sort of hit their sublight engines and take off. Clearly Grogu wants to go fast. So that sort of wraps up them. They've helped Boba Fett, and now they're heading off. And so that wraps up nicely their little interaction with Boba Fett, setting them up well for Mandalorian Season 3.
Now, there is an end credit, or at least after the main credits, a mid-credit scene. And I think it relates to just a brief snippet of conversation that Boba Fett and Fennec had for that transition to Mando in space. Between them, they basically, I think Boba Fett says something along the lines of, he's not, now that the mayor's dead, he's not willing, not actually wanted to take on that role of that type of leader. He might want to be a daimyo, but he doesn't want to be a bureaucrat. And I think that's just a little snippet of conversation that's significant. We, of course, haven't seen Cobb Vanth at this point. Presumed he was dead, but if we reflect on it, the bartender actually said that he was shot down in cold blood, not shot dead in cold blood earlier on in the episode. So the end credit scene is a view of Boba's Bacta tank up in his main room, and as we zoom in on it, we pretty promptly see that it's Cobb Vanth, and that the mod artist is actually behind it with a bit of his gear. So Bacta might not be everything that is necessary to help Cobb Vanth at this point in time, but he does seem to be alive and is getting the treatment that he needs. What this means for his future down the line, I don't think they'd show this if Cobb Vanth was going to have a significant role in something else down the line. And I'm not sure if his time with Boba Fett and Boba Fett's story arc is necessarily over just yet. There's a chance that this might even sort of tie into that comment that I just said, where Boba Fett's not interested in running the town as a bureaucrat. He might be a daimyo in the background and play that specific role, but we know Cobb Vanth is a bit more of a
man of the people.
He's done it on a small scale. Maybe it's time for him to have a slightly bigger role, maybe a New Republic Ranger type role in Mos Espa.
Yeah, he's definitely a man of the law, doesn't tolerate spice. He definitely looks out for the sort of the welfare of the town, wants to look after people, doesn't mind sort of really working with the people, being in amongst them. I almost wonder whether having
he's so respected by the people as well.
Yes.
Impression.
It would be interesting to see if perhaps they would basically promote the bartender to being sort of leader of Freetown. Obviously, he was the one that led them into battle. That's a little bit more than your average bartender. Yeah. He really stood up and proved himself in battle. He could, and we knew that...
He was leading them at that point in time in Cobb Vanth's absence.
And we know that through the interactions between the bartender and Cobb Vanth respected the bartender more than his own deputy. He understood that he kind of got how things go, and was basically telling the bartender to go round up everyone in town of fighting age. He wasn't telling his deputy to do that. So I wouldn't sort of completely put it out of the question that perhaps he will sort of rise as a leader for that, and then that would leave Cobb Vanth to be sort of leader of a bigger town now that there is a bit of a power vacuum. The gangs are, I guess, going to sort of disintegrate a little bit, having the leadership cut out and a fair amount of them taken out by the various forces during the battle. We see a few Trandoshans and the like kind of getting killed in the various fights. The mods take out a few in their fighting and stuff like that. So it's going to take somebody that's got a really sort of hard line to try and keep a balance in Mos Espa now that the mayor and a bunch of important leaders are gone. So it'd be really, really interesting. And I think he would be a really interesting, possibly recurring character for The Mandalorian. If we're not going to go back to Navarro very often and the likes of Cara Dune, perhaps we'll see a slightly more recurring appearance on Tatooine with the likes of Cobb Vanth and Peli Motto. I think those two are really fun characters that I want to see more of.
Oh, and but I mean, both of them have good screen charisma, and I think are fan favourites in their own respective rights.
And just as a little side note, I kind of want to see the Major Domo a little bit more as well. He seemed to sort of be hanging out with Peli Motto. I think that would be fun. She kind of shoots a few comments like she thinks he's a bit handsome or something like that. We know that obviously within the Star Wars world, dating outside of your species, obviously we see Kanan and Hera. It's not exactly out of the question for Peli and the Major Domo to be together. She could probably use a bit of help. But I think it would be fun either in a possible subsequent Boba Fett series, but I think it makes a lot of sense. We see the Mandalorian interacting primarily with Cobb Vanth. We don't really see a lot of interaction between Boba Fett and Cobb Vanth. They're obviously collaborating here, but...
Well, he's in Boba Fett's back to tank, so one way or another. Boba Fett respects him enough to lend him that technology. Yeah,
because obviously Boba Fett didn't get his armor back directly from Cobb Vanth. It was Din Djarin's efforts that returned his armor to him. And obviously there's a bit of mutual respect. Obviously it technically belongs to Boba Fett, but it was obviously at a bit of a loss to Cobb Vanth to give that up. It was obviously an asset to him. So yeah, I think it would be interesting to see some sort of collaboration. I definitely don't think we've seen the last of these characters. I want to see more of them.
It wouldn't make sense for Cobb Vanth to be revealed to be alive in an end credit scene, no less, if he didn't have much more story to come. So I think we can count on that.
Like, I was a bit disappointed when we hear the bartender saying that he was gunned down in cold blood, and I was like, I really wanted to see more of him. It's set up to make you feel like that he survived the hit from Cad Bane, but in this way, I think we'll actually get more than just sort of seeing him and helping out in the fight in this episode. I'm really excited to see what plans they might have, because everyone was kind of expecting some big reveal at the end of this one, like we got at the end of The Mandalorian Season 2, where we got the big reveal that the Book of Boba Fett was announced. And while this didn't exactly have a title or any kind of other further information, it's obviously implying to the audience that there is much more to come here, that you wouldn't just go, oh yeah, he's actually alive. That could be easily have explained in just a line of dialogue or two, like, yeah, Cobb Vanth got hit, but he's okay, he's just recuperating. Like, they could just, worded it some way. So I'm really excited to see what they have in store for him. And overall, I think this was just a really fun episode.
Yeah, and I think it fits in well and as an end cap in a way that's going to make the whole season work well as a binge watchable package.
I think some fans got a little too caught up in all the spoilers and stuff. Everyone was convinced that the characters like Kira and Crimson Dawn were going to show up, or Bosk and some of the other classic bounty hunters. And I'm like, I think that would just muddy it. It would take away from sort of this being Boba Fett's story. If you start adding everyone else in, then it's not really him doing stuff, is it? It's everyone just having an all-out bounty hunter brawl. And I think it was more interesting to we put all the chess pieces in play, and then we did the final skirmish, with all of the pieces, no sort of additional, out of left field, ooh, who's this coming in? I like that we sort of had these little build-up moments, with Black Chrysanthemum showing up early in the piece. We had Cad Bane being introduced earlier, so it wasn't like a, oh no, he's here and now he's dead type moment, that we sort of got a progression into it. And I think if you take out the sort of if you take out the expectation of something mind-blowing, then it's much more easier to enjoy this for just what it is. Classic movies kind of set up, you introduce the scene, you introduce a conflict, and then you end up with the resolution. You're not throwing in random left field things, right at the end. I think some sort of modern culture, we're sort of wired to have like mind-blowing cliffhangers after every episode, to sort of hook you in or something like that. But there's just something so satisfying about just getting to the conclusion and everything felt resolved.
I think with the amount of Star Wars material we're expecting over the next little while, we've got to be a lot more happy with just with stories that are just telling, slightly more singular threads without too much branching or complexity. These are just Star Wars stories that need to be told. They don't need to be mind-blowing. They don't need to be galaxy-shattering or anything. I think we just need to be a lot more happy with smaller stories. And I think that's a good thing because there's so many, many more of those. If there's too many big stories, this is something that the old EU suffered from, that everything had to be a galactic level threat. I just want to see some of the, character stories.
Yeah. I'm expecting, and I'm sure a lot of fans are expecting, there to be some very incredible moments in the Kenobi series. And I feel like a character like Kenobi and the kind of connections that he has, Jedi, the Empire, Vader, and all that kind of stuff, I feel like that would be fitting. I don't think they're going to randomly throw Bosk in the sideways of that one.
But Vader and Kenobi, I think that's just asking for something slightly different from what we're talking about here. But I think the likes of Andor and maybe even something else down the line, they're just going to be, stories that explain how people got from A to B.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to throw us any kind of curveballs with Andor. I think it's predominantly going to be new original characters setting up this whole sort of underground rebellion. I don't think they're going to be bombarding us with like a CG Leia and like a young Bail Organa like every, 3 episodes or something like that. I think they're going to try and cultivate new characters in an underground sort of culture without just, constantly like, so many people seem caught up with, possibly because Luke has done it, that we're now bringing in established characters and putting them into these stories, that everyone now sets the bar. Okay, they've got to bring in a Luke level character to blow our minds, but that's just not going to happen every episode or even every series. And I don't mind that. I think if we start bombarding it, it loses the impact when it does happen.
No, especially with the amount of material we're expecting even this year. Obi-Wan Kenobi is going to have some real twists. Andor's coming later. We're still a Bad Batch. We want to just enjoy it all. Just enjoy the visuals and enjoy the development of the characters that we're already familiar with. Yeah, okay, big conversation, big week, big episode. But that's about it for today's installment. I guess we're done doing talking. If you have any thoughts on the topics we discussed today, we're definitely keen to hear them, so leave a comment on the YouTube page or our website page for this podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ.co.nz, for Star Wars news for New Zealanders and another podcast episode next week and every Tuesday. And don't forget, you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Kia ora, kia noho haumaru, thank you for listening and stay safe.
Turou Hawaiki, may the force be with you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, go ahead and like the video, check out the SWNZ Podcast playlist for our other episodes, and subscribe for alerts about new episodes. See you next time.